A poor kid walked into the richest boardroom in Manhattan. "I can fix this myself," he said, staring at their billion-dollar mistake. The CEO laughed in his face. But when the boy erased the equation, his smile died forever. Nobody in the conference room noticed when the door opened. The 52nd floor of Sterling Capital Management was a monument to wealth and power. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Manhattan like a throne surveying a kingdom. The boardroom contained leather chairs worth more than most families earned in months, Italian marble floors that reflected the crystal chandeliers above, and a massive whiteboard stretching across an entire wall, currently covered in mathematical equations representing a $3 billion investment algorithm. Richard Castellano stood at the head of the conference table, radiating the absolute confidence of a man who'd never been wrong. At 56, he was the CEO and majority owner of Sterling Capital, one of Wall Street's most ruthless success stories. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his suit cost more than a used car, and the Patek Philippe on his wrist could have fed a family for half a year. He'd built his empire through brilliant analytics and an unwillingness to tolerate weakness in any form. "Gentlemen," Richard said, gesturing toward the whiteboard with casual authority, "this algorithm will revolutionize predictive investment. When we launch, Sterling Capital will own the market for the next decade." 5 executives in expensive suits nodded with practiced enthusiasm. Among them was Dr. Marcus Webb, the senior analyst who'd spent 15 years earning Richard's trust through meticulous, careful work. Even Marcus seemed excited about this project, the crown jewel of 18 months of development and $3 million in research. "Marcus, walk them through the final calculations," Richard ordered. Marcus approached the board, pointing to different sections of the complex formula. "The model integrates 12 variables: market volatility indices, consumer confidence patterns, international trade fluctuations." The door opened quietly. A woman in a maintenance uniform slipped inside, carrying a bucket and cleaning supplies. She moved along the wall like a ghost, trying to be invisible in the way service workers learn to be around important people. Helena had worked in this building for 3 years, cleaning offices after everyone went home, existing in the margins of other people's success. Behind her, a small figure appeared in the doorway. The boy was maybe 10 years old, thin and serious-looking, with dark hair that needed cutting. His clothes were clean but worn, a shirt with a carefully stitched patch on the elbow, pants slightly too short, sneakers held together with super glue and determination. His hands showed dirt under the fingernails from helping his mother clean buildings after school. Noah wasn't supposed to be here. His school had called that morning saying he was sick, and Helena couldn't afford to miss another shift. She'd hidden him in the break room with homework and a sandwich, but he'd wandered off. Helena's eyes went wide with panic when she saw him in the doorway. She gestured frantically for him to leave, her weathered face showing the terror of someone who knew how easily she could lose the job that kept her children fed. But Noah wasn't looking at his mother. He was staring at the whiteboard. His eyes moved across the equations with intense focus, his lips moving slightly, as if reading something fascinating. His brow furrowed. He took a step forward, then another, pulled toward the board like it was calling him. "Excuse me," one of the junior executives said sharply, noticing the interruption. "This is a closed meeting." "I'm so sorry, sir," Helena whispered, her accent thick with embarrassment. She grabbed Noah's arm. "He leaves now." But Noah didn't move. He stood frozen, studying the whiteboard with an expression that looked almost like concern. Richard Castellano turned to see what had interrupted his meeting. When his eyes landed on Noah, this poor kid with patches on his clothes and dirt under his nails, his face transformed into a smile that wasn't kind at all. It was the smile of a predator who'd just found unexpected entertainment. Well, Richard said, his voice carrying that particular edge of amused superiority that made everyone pay attention. "What do we have here? A little mathematician?" Laughter rippled through the room. 6 men in suits that cost more than Helena made in 3 months, all turned to stare at this child, who clearly didn't belong in their world. "Maybe he's here to check our work," one executive said, grinning. "Should we ask him to review our algorithm?" Another added mockingly. Helena's face burned with shame. She'd accepted being invisible, accepted cleaning up after people who never saw her as human. But watching these men mock her son, her brilliant, sensitive boy, was different. It hurt in a way that made it hard to breathe. Please, Helena said quietly, pulling at Noah's arm. We go now. No, wait, Richard interrupted, his smile growing wider. He was enjoying this. I want to hear what the genius thinks. Come here, kid. You understand what you're looking at? Noah finally looked away from the whiteboard to meet Richard's eyes. In that moment, two worlds collided. Richard saw a nobody, someone so beneath his notice that acknowledging him was an act of charity, a source of amusement for a boring Tuesday morning. What Richard didn't see was the quality of intelligence in Noah's dark eyes, the kind that had nothing to do with expensive schools or advantages, the kind that simply existed, raw and undeniable. Sir, Noah said quietly, his young voice steady despite the fear he must have felt. There's a mistake in your equation. The laughter stopped like someone had cut power to the room. Richard's smile froze on his face. Several executives stopped mid-chuckle, confused by the sudden shift. What did you just say? Richard asked, his tone still light but with something dangerous underneath. The third variable, Noah said, looking back at the board. The coefficient is wrong. It's going to cause the whole model to fail. Absolute silence. Every person in that room stared at this 10-year-old child like he'd spoken in an alien language. A poor kid who probably went to an underfunded public school, whose mother cleaned toilets, was suggesting an error in an algorithm developed by some of the most expensive analytical minds in finance. Then Richard Castellano threw his head back and laughed. Not a polite chuckle. A full, genuine belly laugh that made him grip the edge of the conference table for support. His face turned red with the force of it. His eyes actually watered. Did everyone hear that? Richard gasped between laughs. The cleaning lady's kid found an error in our equation. He had to pause, overcome by another wave of amusement. The equation that cost us 18 months and $3 million, reviewed by 6 PhDs and dozens of analysts, and this little boy. Another laugh cut him off. This boy who probably can't even do long division claims we made a mistake. The other executives erupted. Some were genuinely amused by the absurdity. Others laughed because Richard was laughing, and survival at Sterling Capital meant matching the CEO's mood perfectly. One executive actually stood to point at Noah, doubled over with laughter. Does he even know what a coefficient is? Probably thinks it's something from a video game, another shouted. Helena was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. She tugged desperately at Noah's arm, trying to pull him toward the door, away from this nightmare. But Noah pulled free from her grip and walked straight toward the whiteboard. His worn sneakers were silent on the expensive carpet. Helena called his name, her voice breaking with desperation. But Noah didn't stop. The executives watched with expressions ranging from amusement to disbelief to irritation that this entertainment was continuing. Noah reached the board and looked up at the equations towering above his small frame. Complex mathematical relationships that would intimidate most graduate students. But his eyes tracked across them with purpose, like he was reading a story only he understood. Oh, this is incredible, one executive said, pulling out his phone. We need to record this. Let him continue, Richard said, still grinning widely. I want to see where this goes. Please, kid, show us this mistake. Enlighten us. The word enlighten dripped with such exaggerated sarcasm that several men chuckled again. Noah reached for the marker in the tray below the whiteboard. His hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what he was about to do. He understood he was violating invisible social rules, crossing boundaries that children like him weren't supposed to cross. But he also understood something else. This equation was wrong. When Sterling Capital used this algorithm, real people would lose money. Maybe their retirement savings, maybe their homes, maybe their children's futures. His mother had taught him that staying silent when you saw something wrong was the same as helping the wrong happen. Noah turned to face the room full of powerful men. I can fix this myself, he said quietly. Then he reached up and erased an entire line of the equation. The laughter died instantly. Richard's smile vanished like someone had flipped a switch. His face went from amused to shocked to furious in 2 seconds. What do you think you're doing? Richard's voice came out sharp, dangerous. But Noah had already turned back to the board. His small hand moved across the whiteboard with surprising confidence, replacing the erased section with something different. His handwriting was childish and unsteady, but the numbers and symbols themselves were precise, deliberate, purposeful. The executives watched in stunned silence as this poor kid, this nobody, rewrote their $3 billion algorithm. "Stop him," one executive said, starting to rise. "He's destroying—" "Wait," Marcus Webb said suddenly, sharply. The senior analyst had moved closer to the board, his eyes following Noah's corrections with growing intensity. His face had gone pale. Everyone just— "Wait." Something in Marcus's tone made everyone freeze. He wasn't someone who spoke without reason. When Marcus Webb said to wait, there was always a good reason. Noah finished writing and stepped back, marker still in hand. He turned to face the room full of adults, all staring at him with expressions ranging from rage to confusion to, in Marcus's case, something that looked like horror. The boy's voice was steady when he spoke. "The coefficient was wrong. You needed to adjust for temporal lag in the data correlation. Without that correction, your model would show initial success, maybe for a few weeks, but then accumulated error would compound. The whole system would start giving false predictions right when people trusted it most. That's when real damage happens." The silence that followed wasn't like before. This wasn't the silence of amusement or mockery. This was the silence of people whose reality had just cracked. Marcus Webb stared at the board, his face growing paler by the second. His eyes moved from the original equation to Noah's correction and back again. His lips moved silently, working through the mathematics in his head. "This is ridiculous," Richard said, but his voice had lost its confident edge. He looked at Marcus, waiting for confirmation that this was all nonsense. "Marcus, tell me this child hasn't just—" "Sir," Marcus interrupted, and everyone in the room heard the shake in his voice. He turned to face Richard, and the fear in his eyes was unmistakable. "Sir, we need to run immediate verification on this." "What are you saying?" Richard demanded. Marcus swallowed hard, looking between the board and his CEO. "I'm saying, the boy might be right." The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Richard Castellanos' face went through several colors, red, then white, then red again. Around the table, executives looked at each other with dawning horror as the implications sank in. This poor kid, this nobody who'd wandered in from the hallways, had potentially just found a catastrophic flaw in their flagship project. A flaw that 6 PhDs and 24 analysts had missed. A flaw that would have cost billions. Helena stood by the door, tears still streaming down her face. But now they were different tears. She looked at her son standing by that massive whiteboard, marker in hand, facing down a room full of powerful men who'd been laughing at him 60 seconds ago. And she saw what they were only beginning to see. Noah wasn't just smart. He was extraordinary. Richard Castellano opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time in decades, he had absolutely no idea what to say. The boy who wasn't supposed to be there, who should have been invisible, who they'd mocked and laughed at, had just changed everything. For several seconds, nobody moved. The conference room, usually filled with the confident voices of men who controlled billions, had become a vacuum of sound. Even the hum of the air conditioning seemed to have disappeared, leaving only the scratching of Noah's marker against the whiteboard as he continued writing. Richard Castellano stood frozen at the head of the table, his brain struggling to process what Marcus Webb had just said. The boy might be right. Those 4 words didn't make sense. Couldn't make sense. This was a poor kid who'd wandered in with his cleaning lady mother, a child who probably went to some underfunded public school in the Bronx or Queens, someone so far removed from their world that he might as well have been from another planet. And yet Marcus, careful, meticulous Marcus who never spoke without absolute certainty, had just suggested that this child had found an error that 6 PhDs and an entire team of analysts had missed. "Marcus," Richard said, his voice tight with forced calm, "you need to explain what you mean, right now." But Marcus wasn't listening. He'd moved closer to the whiteboard, standing just behind Noah, watching as the boy continued making corrections. Marcus's hand trembled as he pulled reading glasses from his pocket and put them on, leaning in to study the modified equation more carefully. Noah finished writing and stepped back, setting the marker down in the tray. His small hand left a smudge on the pristine whiteboard. He turned to face the room again, and for the first time since he'd started writing, he looked scared. Not of what he'd done, but of what would happen next. Helena remained by the door, one hand pressed against her mouth, tears still streaming down her weathered face. She wanted to grab her son and run, to escape this room full of powerful men before something terrible happened. But her feet wouldn't move. She stood rooted in place, watching her 10-year-old boy face down the kind of people who could destroy their lives with a phone call. The temporal lag coefficient, Marcus whispered, more to himself than anyone else. His finger traced Noah's corrections on the board. He adjusted for data correlation across time periods. That's exactly what we missed. What are you talking about? Richard demanded, his voice rising. Several other executives had stood up now, moving closer to the board, trying to understand what was happening. Marcus turned to face Richard, and everyone in the room could see genuine fear in the senior analyst's eyes. In 15 years at Sterling Capital, Marcus Webb had never looked afraid. Concerned, yes. Cautious, always, but never afraid. Sir, the algorithm we've been developing, the foundation of our entire predictive model, has a fundamental flaw. Marcus's voice shook as he spoke. The coefficient we use for variable 3 assumes that historical market patterns will repeat with consistent timing. But that's not how markets actually work. Of course that's how markets work, one of the other executives interrupted. We've built our entire career on pattern recognition. Patterns repeat, Marcus said, but not on a fixed timeline. There's temporal variance, lag time between cause and effect, that shifts based on external factors. Our model treats time as a constant, but it's actually a variable. Without adjusting for that, he trailed off, his face going even paler. Without adjusting for what? Richard pressed. Marcus swallowed hard. Without that adjustment, our algorithm would work perfectly for approximately 3 to 4 weeks. It would predict market movements with stunning accuracy. We'd gain massive trust from clients, probably attract billions in new investments. And then, he paused, looking at Noah with something between horror and awe. And then the accumulated error would compound. The predictions would start failing, slowly at first, then catastrophically. By the time we realized what was happening, we'd have invested billions based on false projections. The room erupted. That's impossible, one executive shouted. We've tested this algorithm for months. In simulated environments, Marcus said quietly. We haven't live-tested it against real market conditions. We were planning to launch next month with actual client money. The implications of this statement settled over the room like a heavy fog. They'd been weeks away from implementing an algorithm that would have catastrophically failed, potentially destroying the firm and wiping out billions in client investments. All because of an error in a single coefficient. An error that a 10-year-old boy had spotted in less than 2 minutes. Richard Castellano felt his carefully constructed world tilting on its axis. He was a man who prided himself on always being the smartest person in the room, on seeing angles others missed, on staying 3 steps ahead of everyone else. That reputation, that certainty, was the foundation of everything he'd built. And this child had just exposed him as blind. This is absurd, Richard said, but his voice lacked conviction. Marcus, you're telling me that a child with no education, no credentials, no experience, just saw something that our entire team missed? Yes, sir, Marcus said simply. That's exactly what I'm telling you. Another executive, James Bradford, the head of quantitative analysis, pushed forward to look at the board. He was younger than most of the others, mid-30s, with a reputation for aggressive confidence. He'd been one of the loudest in mocking Noah. Let me see this, James said, pulling his phone out and opening a calculation app. His fingers flew across the screen as he worked through the mathematics, checking Noah's corrections against the original formula. The room waited in tense silence. Helena inched closer to Noah, wanting to protect him but afraid to draw attention. Noah stood very still, his young face showing exhaustion now that the adrenaline was fading. He looked like what he was, a small, scared child who'd just done something far beyond his years. James's face went from skeptical to confused, to horrified in the span of 30 seconds. No, he whispered. No, that can't be. What? Richard demanded. James looked up from his phone, his face pale. He's not just right about the coefficient. He's right about everything. The temporal lag adjustment, the correlation variance, the compound error projection. It's all correct. And if we'd launched with the original formula, he couldn't finish the sentence. How bad? Richard asked quietly. Catastrophic, James said. We're talking potential losses in the billions. Not just for us, for every client we convinced to invest based on our projections. The lawsuits alone would have destroyed the firm. Criminal negligence charges were possible. The room fell silent again, but this silence was different. It wasn't shock anymore. It was the creeping horror of people realizing just how close they'd come to disaster. But who is he? Another executive asked, staring at Noah like he'd materialized from thin air. How does a kid know this? Everyone turned to look at Noah, who seemed to shrink under the weight of their attention. Helena stepped forward instinctively, placing a protective hand on her son's shoulder. His name is Noah, Helena said quietly. It was the first time she'd spoken since the laughter had stopped. Her voice was soft but steady, strengthened by a mother's need to protect her child. My son. He's 10 years old. 10 years old, Richard repeated, as if saying it out loud would make it make sense. It didn't. Where does he go to school? Public School 184 in the Bronx, Helena said. He's in 5th grade. 5th grade, James Bradford said faintly. He's in 5th grade and he just corrected a PhD-level algorithm that 23 analysts missed. Does he have tutors? Another executive asked. Special programs. How? We can't afford tutors, Helena said, a note of defiance entering her voice. I work 3 jobs to pay rent and buy food. Noah learns from library books and free online courses. Library books, Richard repeated. He felt like he was in a dream or a nightmare. Nothing about this situation made sense. Children like Noah weren't supposed to exist. Brilliance like this was supposed to come from expensive schools, from advantages and opportunities and resources. It wasn't supposed to come from a poor kid in worn-out sneakers whose mother cleaned toilets for a living. Marcus Webb crouched down to Noah's level, his face kind despite the tension in the room. Noah, can you tell me how you saw the error so quickly? Most of us have been staring at this equation for months. Noah looked at his mother, who nodded encouragingly despite her obvious fear. He turned back to Marcus. The numbers weren't dancing right, Noah said quietly. Dancing? Marcus asked gently. When I look at equations, I can see how the numbers relate to each other. Like they're dancing together. If they're dancing wrong, if the rhythm is off, I can see it. Noah's young face scrunched up with the effort of explaining something he didn't fully understand himself. Your equation had numbers that weren't dancing together properly. The third variable was stepping on everyone else's toes. Several executives exchanged confused glances, but Marcus's face showed understanding. And something else. Wonder, maybe, or fear. Synesthesia, Marcus said softly. You're visualizing mathematical relationships as physical movements. That's extraordinary. What does that mean? Helena asked nervously. It means your son doesn't just understand mathematics, Marcus explained, standing up. He experiences it differently than most people. He can see patterns and relationships that the rest of us have to work out step by step. It's like he's speaking a language that's native to him but foreign to everyone else. Richard Castellano sat down heavily in his chair. For the first time in his adult life, he felt completely out of his depth. He'd built his career on being able to read situations, control outcomes, maintain dominance, but he had no framework for understanding what was happening right now. A poor child from the Bronx had just saved his company from catastrophic failure, the same child he'd mocked and laughed at 5 minutes ago. Sir, Marcus said quietly, we need to halt the algorithm launch immediately. We need to rebuild the model using Noah's corrections and run extensive testing before we even think about going live. Agreed, Richard said automatically. His mind was already racing through the implications. How many other projects had errors they'd missed? How many times had their confidence blinded them to problems that might have been obvious to fresh eyes? How much had their arrogance cost them? There's something else, James Bradford said, still staring at the whiteboard. The way he restructured the correlation coefficient, it's not just a fix, it's an improvement. The model will be significantly more accurate with his changes than it would have been even without the error. More accurate by how much? Richard asked. James worked through calculations on his phone again. Conservatively, 15 to 20% improvement in prediction reliability. That's revolutionary. With accuracy like that, we wouldn't just dominate the market. We'd rewrite the entire industry. The room buzzed with renewed energy as the executives began to realize the opportunity that had just fallen into their laps. They'd avoided disaster, yes, but they'd also discovered something potentially game-changing. Only Marcus seemed troubled by the direction the conversation was taking. He looked at Noah, at this exhausted 10-year-old boy who was swaying slightly on his feet, and then at the executives who were already calculating profit margins. "Gentlemen," Marcus said firmly, "I think we're getting ahead of ourselves. We need to hire him," Richard interrupted, standing up with renewed energy. His mind was already working through possibilities, strategies, angles. "As a consultant, we'll pay his mother for his insights. We'll set up a formal arrangement. He's 10 years old," Marcus said quietly. "So we'll structure it appropriately," Richard continued, waving away the concern. "Educational trust, future scholarship guarantees, whatever works legally. The point is, we've just discovered possibly the most valuable analytical mind in the financial industry. And he's currently—" He looked at Helena. "What do you do here?" "I clean the bathrooms," Helena said, lifting her chin despite the shame she felt saying it. "Not anymore," Richard declared. "We're going to take care of this. Take care of both of you. Properly." It should have been a happy moment. The generous CEO recognizing talent, offering to help a struggling family. But something about Richard's tone made it feel less like generosity and more like acquisition, like he was calculating the value of a newly discovered asset. Noah swayed again, more noticeably this time. Helena noticed immediately and pulled him close. "He's tired," Helena said. "He was up all night with fever. That's why school called. He shouldn't even be here. He had a fever, and he still caught our error," James Bradford said with disbelief. Marcus moved toward Helena and Noah, positioning himself subtly between them and the other executives. "I think Noah and his mother need to go home now. We can discuss arrangements later, but right now, this child needs rest." "But we have questions," one executive protested. "We need to understand his process, document his methodology." "Later," Marcus said firmly. His tone carried an authority that surprised everyone, including himself. "The boy is exhausted and overwhelmed. Whatever discussions we need to have can wait until he's had time to recover." Richard looked like he wanted to argue, but he caught Marcus's expression and reconsidered. There was something protective in the senior analyst's stance, something that suggested pushing this further right now would be a mistake. "Fine," Richard said. "But Helena, Noah, don't leave the building. Wait in the break room. We'll send someone to discuss compensation and arrangements within the hour." He tried to make it sound like a generous offer, but it came out more like an order. Helena nodded, too overwhelmed to do anything else. She guided Noah toward the door, her arm around his thin shoulders. As they reached the doorway, Noah turned back to look at the whiteboard one more time. "The fifth variable needs checking too," he said quietly. "I didn't have time to look closely, but something feels off there as well." Then he and his mother disappeared into the hallway, leaving behind a room full of men who suddenly felt very small. Marcus Webb walked back to the whiteboard and studied the fifth variable that Noah had mentioned. His hands were shaking as he pulled out his phone and began running calculations. "Marcus?" Richard asked. "What is it?" Marcus looked up, his face pale again. "He's right. Variable 5 has a smaller error, but it's there. If we'd launched with both mistakes—" He trailed off, unable to finish. Richard Castellano sat down again, feeling like he'd aged 10 years in the last 10 minutes. Around him, his executives were quiet, each processing what had just happened in their own way. A poor child from the Bronx, a child they'd mocked and laughed at, had just saved them from disaster and potentially given them the key to revolutionizing their entire industry, and they'd almost thrown him out like garbage. The irony was so sharp, it cut. Helena and Noah sat in the empty break room on the 52nd floor, surrounded by vending machines humming quietly in the corner. Noah's head rested against his mother's shoulder, his eyes half closed with exhaustion. The fever that had sent him home from school was making him shiver despite the warmth of the room. Helena stroked his hair gently, the way she'd done since he was a baby. Her hands, rough from years of cleaning chemicals and hard work, moved with infinite tenderness across her son's forehead. "Mama," Noah whispered. "Am I in trouble?" "No, mi amor," Helena said softly. "You did nothing wrong. You were just being yourself. Through the break room's small window, she could see the Manhattan skyline stretching endlessly in all directions. All those buildings filled with people who would never know her name, never see her as anything more than the woman who emptied their trash and scrubbed their toilets. But they'd seen Noah. Finally, someone had seen what she'd always known was there. Her mind drifted back 7 years, to the moment everything had changed. Noah had been 3 years old, sitting at their tiny kitchen table in the Bronx apartment they shared with 2 other families. Helena had been working on the monthly bills, trying to make numbers that didn't add up somehow stretch far enough to cover rent, food, and electricity. She'd been crying, quietly, so Noah wouldn't hear, when his small voice had interrupted. "Mama, you need $47 more." Helena had looked up, confused. "What, baby?" Noah had pointed at the bills scattered across the table. "The numbers. They don't match." "You have this much." He'd pointed to one pile. "But you need this much." He'd pointed to another. "The difference is $47. Helena had stared at her 3-year-old son, who couldn't yet read, who'd never been taught about addition or subtraction. She'd checked his math. He'd been exactly right. That had been the first time, not the last. By age 4, Noah was solving complex mathematical problems that Helena found in library books, working through them like puzzles while other children played with toys. By 5, he was teaching himself algebra from videos at the public library's computer terminals. By 6, he was correcting errors in his teacher's math lessons, which had earned him a reputation as a difficult child until one teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, had actually listened to him and realized he was right. Helena had tried to get him into gifted programs, special schools, anything that could nurture his extraordinary mind. But those programs required tests that cost money, applications that needed computers and internet access they didn't have, recommendations from schools that didn't believe a poor kid from the Bronx could be genuinely brilliant. So Helena had done what she always did. She'd worked harder. She'd taken a 3rd job, cleaning this very building at Sterling Capital, because it paid slightly more than other places and gave her access to the employee library. Every night, after her shift ended at 2 in the morning, she would check out mathematics textbooks and carry them home for Noah. Books written for college students, for graduate programs, for professionals, and Noah had devoured them all. "Mama," Noah had asked her once when he was 8, "why do the numbers make some people rich and other people poor?" Helena hadn't known how to answer that question. She still didn't. The break room door opened, pulling Helena back to the present. She looked up to see Marcus Webb entering, carrying 2 bottles of water and a sandwich from the vending machine. "I thought Noah might be hungry," Marcus said gently, offering the food. "And you should drink something too." Helena accepted the water gratefully but hesitated before taking the sandwich. "How much do I owe you?" "Nothing," Marcus said. "Please. It's the least I can do after what just happened in there." Helena unwrapped the sandwich and broke off a piece, offering it to Noah. He ate mechanically, still exhausted, while Helena watched Marcus with cautious eyes. She'd learned not to trust kindness from wealthy people. It always came with conditions. Marcus pulled out a chair and sat down across from them, moving slowly, like someone approaching a frightened animal. "Helena," he said quietly, "can I ask you something? How long have you known that Noah was special?" "Since he was 3 years old," Helena said. "He counted the bills on our kitchen table and told me exactly how much money we were short for rent. I thought maybe it was luck, but then it kept happening. Math, patterns, numbers. He could see them all so clearly, like they were written in a language only he understood. Have you tried to get him into programs for gifted children?" Helena's expression hardened. "I tried everything, sir. Every program required money we didn't have, or tests at times when I was working. One school told me that children from disadvantaged backgrounds usually couldn't sustain advanced academic performance. They said Noah's abilities were probably—" Her voice caught. "They said it was probably just memorization, not real understanding." Marcus closed his eyes, pain evident on his face. "That's criminal. The amount of talent that gets wasted because of prejudice and poverty." He stopped himself. "I'm sorry. That's not helpful right now." "It's the truth," Helena said simply. "Helena, I need you to understand something." Marcus leaned forward, his voice intense. "What Noah did in that conference room, finding those errors, understanding the algorithm well enough to correct it, That's not just impressive for a 10-year-old. That's impressive for anyone. Some of the smartest analysts I know couldn't have done what he did. He's always been like this with numbers, Helena said. He sees patterns everywhere, in the subway schedule, in the prices at the grocery store, in everything. I don't understand it, but I know it's real. It's called synesthesia, Marcus explained. Noah experiences mathematical relationships as physical sensations or visual patterns. It's extremely rare. Combined with his natural analytical ability, it makes him... He paused, choosing words carefully. Helena, your son might be one of the most gifted mathematical minds I've ever encountered. Helena felt tears starting again. I know he's special. I've always known. But what good does it do him? We can't afford the schools that would appreciate his gift. I can barely afford to keep him fed. That's going to change, Marcus said firmly. Richard Castellano is many things. Arrogant, difficult, sometimes cruel. But he recognizes valuable talent when he sees it. He's going to want to help Noah. Help him or use him? Helena asked sharply. Marcus hesitated. That's a fair question. And I'll be honest with you. Richard's first instinct will be transactional. He'll see Noah as an asset, an opportunity. But, he paused. What happened in that room today? The humiliation of being proven wrong by a child he'd mocked. That shook Richard in a way I've never seen before. Maybe it's enough to make him actually change. Maybe not. But either way, I'm going to make sure Noah is protected. Why? Helena asked. Why would you help us? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft with old pain. 25 years ago, I was a scholarship student at MIT. I was the first person in my family to go to college. My father worked in a factory. My mother cleaned houses. He met Helena's eyes. I know what it's like to be the smartest person in a room and have everyone assume you're the dumbest because of where you came from. Helena felt something in her chest loosen slightly. This man understood. Not completely. He'd made it through, he'd succeeded, but he understood the fight. Someone helped me, Marcus continued. A professor who saw past my background and actually looked at my work. He's the reason I have this career. I've been looking for a way to pay that forward ever since. He smiled at Noah, who was watching him with those serious, too old eyes. I think I just found it. The break room door opened again. This time, Richard Castellano entered, and the warmth that had been building in the room evaporated instantly. Richard looked different than he had in the conference room. His perfect hair was slightly disheveled, like he'd been running his hands through it. His tie was loosened, and his face, his supremely confident face, showed something Helena had never seen on a man like him. Uncertainty. Helena, Noah. Richard's voice was careful, controlled. I need to speak with you about what happens next. Helena stood, positioning herself between Richard and her son. We're going home. Noah needs rest. Whatever you want to discuss can wait. Of course, Richard said quickly. But first, I need to say something. He looked at Noah, and to Helena's shock, she saw genuine emotion in his eyes. What I did in that conference room, laughing at you, mocking you, was unforgivable. You came into my office, you saw a problem, and you tried to help. And his voice caught. I treated you like you were nothing, like you didn't matter. Noah stared at him silently. You saved my company today, Richard continued. You saved my reputation, my clients' money, possibly my entire career. And you did it after I'd humiliated you and your mother in front of a room full of people. He paused. I don't know how to make that right. I'm not even sure I can, but I want to try. You want to hire him, Helena said flatly. Turn my son into your employee. No, Richard said, and he sounded sincere. I want to give him opportunities, real ones. The kind of education and resources that will let him become whatever he wants to be. Not what I want him to be, what he chooses. People like you don't give things without expecting something back, Helena said. Richard flinched. You're right. And I won't pretend I'm doing this purely out of goodness. What Noah can do, it's extraordinary. It's valuable. But he looked at Marcus, then back at Helena. Today I learned that I've been blind. Blind to talent, blind to worth, blind to the humanity of people I considered beneath me. I don't want to be that person anymore. Words are easy, Helena said. Proof is harder. Then let me prove it, Richard said. Let me start by making sure you never have to clean another bathroom. Let me make sure Noah has access to every educational resource he could possibly need. He stopped, emotion cracking his voice. Let me try to be the kind of person who deserves a second chance. Helena looked at Marcus, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Then she looked down at Noah, who was watching Richard with those analytical eyes, seeing patterns in human behavior the way he saw patterns in numbers. Mama, Noah said quietly. The numbers in his voice match. He means what he's saying. Helena didn't understand what that meant, but she trusted her son's instincts more than her own right now. One chance, Helena said firmly. You get one chance to prove you've changed. But if you hurt my son, if you treat him like a tool instead of a child, we're gone. I don't care how much money you offer. Understood? Understood, Richard said, and the relief on his face was unmistakable. Marcus stood. I'll make sure everything is documented properly. Educational trust, legal protections, everything Noah and Helena need. Thank you, Helena whispered. As they prepared to leave, Noah would see a doctor. Helena would take the rest of the day off. Arrangements would be made. Helena allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, the world was about to see what she'd always known. That brilliance has nothing to do with money or privilege. It exists in library books and kitchen tables, in worn-out sneakers and determined hands. It exists in a 10-year-old boy who sees numbers dancing and saves companies from destruction. And maybe, just maybe, one arrogant CEO had learned to see it too. 3 days later, Noah sat in a conference room that had been transformed into something entirely different from his first visit. The intimidating marble and leather had been replaced with comfortable furniture. There were books on mathematics scattered across the table. Real textbooks, not children's books. The kind Noah had only ever borrowed from libraries. A whiteboard stood against one wall, already covered in equations that Marcus had been working through with him. But Noah couldn't focus on any of it. He kept thinking about the moment in the original conference room, about the sound of all those men laughing at him, about his mother's tears, about how small he'd felt standing in front of that massive whiteboard, knowing he was right but terrified that nobody would listen. Noah, Marcus's gentle voice pulled him back. You've been staring at that same problem for 10 minutes. What's wrong? Noah set down his pencil. What if I can't do it again? Do what again? See the mistakes. Find the patterns. Noah's voice was small. What if that was just luck? What if I'm not actually special and everyone's going to be disappointed? Marcus pulled up a chair next to Noah, his expression kind but serious. Can I tell you something I learned a long time ago? Noah nodded. Brilliance isn't about being perfect every time. It's about seeing things others miss, asking questions others don't think to ask. You did that in the conference room, Noah. Not because you're magic or lucky, because you've trained your mind to see patterns through years of practice and natural ability working together. But what if I make a mistake? Noah asked. What if next time I'm wrong? Then you'll be wrong, Marcus said simply, and we'll learn from it together. That's how real mathematics works. Not perfection, discovery. The door opened, and Richard Castellano entered, carrying a large envelope. He looked different than he had 3 days ago. Less polished somehow, more human. Noah, Marcus, Richard greeted them. He set the envelope on the table. I wanted to show you something before your mother arrives. Noah eyed the envelope warily. What is it? The results from the full algorithm audit, Richard said. After we corrected the 2 errors you found, we ran every calculation through verification. The model is now functional, better than functional. It's revolutionary. He paused. Because of you. Because of the mistakes you made, Noah said quietly. The words hung in the air. Marcus tensed, waiting for Richard's reaction to this blunt truth from a 10-year-old. But Richard just nodded slowly. You're absolutely right. My team made those mistakes because we were arrogant. We assumed that expensive educations and impressive credentials meant we couldn't be wrong. We didn't check our work carefully enough because we were too confident in our own brilliance. He sat down across from Noah, meeting the boy's serious eyes. That's the first lesson you've taught me, Richard continued. And I'm trying to learn it. Trying to understand that intelligence and wisdom can come from anywhere, from anyone, especially from people I'd trained myself not to see. Noah studied Richard's face the way he studied equations, looking for patterns, for truth hidden in the variables. My mama says people don't really change. They just hide what they are better. Richard flinched, but didn't look away. Your mother is a smart woman, and she's right to be suspicious. People like me, we've built careers on being right, on having power. Admitting we were wrong, genuinely changing how we see the world, that's harder than any equation. So, why should we trust you? Noah asked. You shouldn't, Richard said simply. Not yet. Trust isn't something I can buy or demand. I have to earn it. That's going to take time, maybe a lot of time. Maybe I'll fail. But I'm going to try anyway, because what happened in that conference room taught me something I needed to learn. What? That I've been measuring success with the wrong numbers, Richard said. I thought success was money, power, being the smartest person in every room. But watching you, seeing your courage, your certainty, your willingness to speak truth even when powerful people were laughing at you, that's a kind of success I've never achieved. That's what I want to learn. Noah was quiet for a long moment. Then, the fifth variable has 3 more errors, small ones. I saw them, but I was too tired to say anything. Richard's eyes widened. Marcus grabbed his tablet immediately, pulling up the algorithm specifications. Show me, Marcus said. For the next 20 minutes, Noah walked them through subtleties in the calculations that the original team had overlooked. His explanations were clear, precise, demonstrating understanding that went far beyond simple pattern recognition. He wasn't just seeing errors. He was understanding why they were errors, what principles they violated, how they would manifest in real-world applications. Marcus and Richard exchanged glances multiple times, their expressions showing a mixture of awe and something else. Humility, perhaps. The recognition that they were in the presence of something extraordinary. When Noah finished, Marcus sat back in his chair. That's postgraduate level analytical thinking. Noah, do you understand what you just did? Noah shrugged. I just explained what I saw. The numbers tell stories if you listen to them. Most people can't hear those stories, Marcus said softly. Most people with PhDs in mathematics can't hear them the way you do. The door opened again. This time, Helena entered, and Noah's face lit up immediately. She looked different too, not the exhausted woman in a maintenance uniform, but someone who'd had 3 days of actual rest. She wore simple clothes, but they were clean and new. Most importantly, the permanent fear in her eyes had lessened, replaced by cautious hope. Mama! Noah jumped up and hugged her. Helena held him tight, then looked at Richard and Marcus with protective wariness. How is he doing? He's brilliant, Marcus said. But I think you already knew that. I've always known, Helena said firmly. She guided Noah back to his chair and sat beside him, keeping one hand on his shoulder. So what happens now? You said you wanted to discuss arrangements. Richard opened the envelope and pulled out several documents. I've had my legal team draw up proposals. Nothing is final. You can take these to your own lawyer if you want. But I wanted to be transparent about what I'm offering. He slid the first document across the table. First, your position. You're no longer part of the maintenance staff. I'm offering you a position as Community Liaison Director. Your job would be working with local schools and community organizations to identify talented kids who might not have traditional opportunities. Salary is here. He pointed to a number that made Helena's eyes widen. It's enough that you won't need 3 jobs anymore. You'll be able to focus on Noah. Helena stared at the number, her hand trembling slightly. It was more than she'd made in 3 years of her previous work combined. Second, Richard continued, sliding another document forward, an educational trust for Noah. This covers private tutoring, enrollment in whatever programs he wants to pursue, college funding, graduate school if he chooses. It's structured so that the money can only be used for education. I can't touch it, and neither can anyone else. It belongs to Noah. How much? Helena asked quietly. $2 million, growing with investment returns, Richard said. Enough that Noah will never have to worry about affording education at any level. Helena pressed her hand to her mouth, tears forming. But there's a condition, Richard added, and Helena's expression immediately hardened. The condition is that Noah remains a child. No publicity, no media appearances, no pressure to perform or produce results. He works with Marcus when he wants to, studying what interests him. But his childhood comes first. Always. Marcus nodded. I insisted on that clause. Noah needs protection from people who might want to exploit his abilities, including us. Helena looked at the documents, at the numbers that represented security she'd never dreamed possible. Then she looked at Richard, searching his face for deception. Why? She asked. Why are you really doing this? Richard was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was raw with emotion he wasn't quite able to hide. Because 3 days ago, I laughed at your son. I mocked him in front of a room full of people because he didn't look like my idea of what brilliance should look like. And in doing so, I revealed something ugly about myself. Something I'd been hiding behind wealth and power for my entire career. He looked at Noah, then back at Helena. Your son saved my company. But more than that, he saved me from becoming completely lost in my own arrogance. This isn't charity, Helena. This is me trying to become the kind of person who deserves to live in the same world as people like you and Noah. People who have real courage, real integrity. Words are still easy, Helena said, but her voice was softer now. Then watch what I do, Richard said. Hold me accountable. If I fail to keep these promises, if I try to exploit Noah, or treat either of you with anything less than complete respect, walk away. These contracts have termination clauses that protect you. You're not trapped. Helena looked at Marcus, who nodded. I reviewed everything personally. It's legitimate, and I'll be here to make sure it stays that way. Noah tugged on his mother's sleeve. Mama, the numbers in the contracts match what he's saying. I checked them. They're fair. Helena smiled despite her tears. Of course her son had already analyzed the financial terms. She looked at the documents again, at the security they represented, at the future they promised. Finally, she picked up the pen Richard offered. One chance, she said, echoing her words from 3 days ago. You get one chance. That's all I'm asking for, Richard said. As Helena signed the documents, her hand shaking slightly, Marcus watched Richard's face carefully. He'd known Richard Castellano for 15 years, had seen him in every situation imaginable, and he'd never seen this expression before, a mixture of relief, humility, and something that looked almost like gratitude. Maybe people could change after all. Or maybe they just needed the right reason to try. 2 years later, Helena stood in the auditorium of the Bronx Community Center, watching dozens of children from low-income families work through mathematics problems with volunteer tutors. The Hidden Genius Initiative, the program she now directed, had identified 47 talented kids in its first year alone. Kids like Noah, whose brilliance had been invisible because nobody had bothered to look. Mrs. Martinez? A young girl approached shyly, holding a worksheet. I solved the equation, but I don't understand why it works. Helena smiled, crouching down to the girl's level. Show me what you did. As the girl explained her process, Helena felt that familiar warmth in her chest. This was her purpose now, not cleaning buildings in the shadows, but bringing hidden talent into the light. That's perfect, Sophia, Helena said. And you want to know why it works? That means you're not just smart. You're a real mathematician. Keep asking why. Across the room, Noah sat with 3 other kids, helping them work through problems. At 12, he'd grown taller, healthier, more confident. But he was still just a kid. He wore a science club t-shirt, had braces, and laughed at terrible jokes with his friends. Marcus had kept his promise. Noah's childhood had been protected. He still worked with Marcus twice a week, but on his own terms. Mathematics was his passion, not his job. The Sterling Capital algorithm had launched 18 months ago. It had performed exactly as Noah's corrections predicted, with unprecedented accuracy. The company had become the most successful predictive investment firm in the country. Richard Castellano's wealth had tripled, but more importantly, Richard himself had changed. He entered the community center now, carrying boxes of new textbooks. He wore jeans and a simple shirt, no expensive suit, no Patek Philippe watch. He volunteered here every Saturday, working alongside Helena to mentor kids who reminded him of the person he'd almost been too blind to see. Helena, Richard greeted her warmly. The new mathematics curriculum just arrived. Where should I put these? Storage room, Helena said. Then softer. Thank you, Richard, for everything. I should be thanking you, Richard said. You and Noah gave me something more valuable than any algorithm. You gave me a chance to become someone I could actually respect. Marcus arrived with pizza for the kids, a Saturday tradition. He'd left Sterling Capital 6 months ago to teach full-time at City College, creating a scholarship program for underprivileged students. His first class had 12 students. By next year, it would be 50. The ripple effect continued spreading. "Attention, everyone," Helena called out. The room quieted. "We have a special announcement today." "Noah?" Noah stood, looking nervous but excited. "So, I've been working on something with Dr. Webb. We created an online platform that teaches advanced mathematics using pattern recognition and visual learning. It's completely free and designed specifically for students who learn differently, like me." He pulled up the website on the projection screen. "It's called Numbers Dancing because that's how I see math, and we want everyone to be able to see it that way too." The kids erupted in applause. Sophia raised her hand. "Can we try it now?" "Absolutely," Marcus said, grinning. As the children rushed to the computers, Richard stood beside Helena, watching the chaos of excited learning fill the room. "Do you remember what you said to me 2 years ago?" Richard asked quietly. "That people like me don't give things without expecting something back?" "I remember," Helena said. "You were right. I did expect something back." Richard smiled. "I expected to become someone worthy of being in the same room as people like you. Someone who could look at himself in the mirror without shame. That's what I got back, and it's worth more than every dollar I've ever made." Noah joined them, flushed with excitement from explaining his platform to the other kids. "Mama, did you see how fast they understood? The visual patterns really work." Helena pulled her son close, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "I'm so proud of you, mi amor." "Mrs. Martinez helped 3 more families this week," Noah said to Richard. "She found 2 kids who are amazing at physics and 1 who's a coding genius. They're all getting scholarships now because of your program." "Our program," Richard corrected gently. "This isn't about me. It never was." As the afternoon continued, Helena watched her son teach other children, watched Marcus inspire young minds, watched Richard, the man who'd once laughed at them, work patiently with a struggling student. She thought about that morning 2 years ago, about walking into that conference room terrified, about watching her son face down powerful men who'd mocked him, about how close they'd come to walking away with nothing. But Noah had been brave. He'd spoken truth to power. He'd shown the world that brilliance doesn't require privilege. It only requires someone willing to see it. The Sterling Capital algorithm had made billions. The Numbers Dancing platform was reaching thousands of students worldwide. The Hidden Genius initiative was changing lives across the city. But the real transformation, the one that mattered most, had happened in human hearts. Richard Castellano had learned to see value in people he'd once considered invisible. Marcus Webb had found his true calling. Helena had discovered that her years of sacrifice had planted seeds that would grow far beyond her son alone. And Noah had learned that his gift wasn't just about numbers. It was about teaching others to see the beauty in patterns, the poetry in equations, the truth that knowledge belongs to everyone. As the sun set over the Bronx, Helena stood at the window, watching the city lights begin to glow. Somewhere out there were more children like Noah, brilliant, overlooked, waiting for someone to see them. Thanks to one boy who dared to correct a billion-dollar equation, more people were finally learning to look.